So we developed ODT InterCompany back in NAV 3, and so the reason why we did was we had found that there was a need among our customers for intercompany transaction, being able to post expenses into a subsidiary company and paying out of a source company, as an example. And back then, NAV did not, or Microsoft did not have their intercompany add-on out for Navision. So we worked through and did that, and then in later on in versions of NAV, I believe it was introduced in version 5, that they had to introduce their intercompany, but we still had demand happening for our add-on. We weren't expecting it, and so we had continued to carry that forward, and we are still doing that today. So our add-on supports all NAV versions 3.7 through to NAV 2016 today. And so the reason for that is that there's some differences or key differences between what our ODT add-on does and our standard NAV, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. But that's why we have continued to carry it forward. It's just because of client demand, actually. So the differences for intercompany is that our add-on allows for coding each document line to a different company. That is different than standard NAV. So standard NAV intercompany, what you do is you create intercompany partner codes, and then you record an invoice to that other company and record the lines. So it's a document to a company. In our add-on, we can, as an example, record a telco bill, and perhaps I have cell phones that are for multiple staff members in different companies. Well, I can simply record those telco charges across, let's say, 3 GL lines to telco GL in 3 different companies. And then when I post those expenses, the expenses hit my target company or companies. And then, of course, I wind up with my offsetting intercompany balancing entry in my source company. So when we get into the demos, I'm going to talk about target and source, and that's kind of how we'll be equating to that as to how we're processing those transactions and the end results for all the accountants out there. The other thing that our intercompany does is it accommodates for general journal intercompany and recurring journals. We do not have an outbox and inbox concept, so what we find is a lot of customers like the fact that they're not having to go into 2 different places within NAV and actually physically always logging into the other or the target company to process the inbox to receive the transactions. The other thing that we have is a bit of an automation where we can turn on this auto posting flag, and what it does is it posts the transactions in the target company as a user is opening the company. Okay, so it doesn't happen automatically on post, but it's as users are using those companies that it pushes through the pending transactions, so not requiring you to physically go through and hit post all the time if you didn't want to. And then our add-on is very simple to set up and use. So the standard NAV has the outbox and inbox transaction for transactions across databases. So that is something that if you do have separate NAV databases for separate companies and are wanting to process intercompany, that's where we would suggest and have you rely on the NAV standard intercompany features, as well as inventory. We do not handle inventory line types. We only handle GL account. So that's one of those important differences to think about as you're considering this add-on. So just a brief overview is that we can control whether intercompany is allowed to be posted in general journals, sales, or purchase documents. We can define users that are allowed to post to which target accounts. So that might be an example where perhaps you have user A who is allowed to post to expenses such as telco, and a user B who is in charge of posting office supply expenses. Well, we can actually reduce or restrict them to which GL accounts they're allowed to select and code to in the target company. We can select or enable for per user the auto post. So which users are allowed to be actioning the post of the intercompany journal as that target company is being opened. We can create IC general journal transactions including the recurring batches. So you might have an example where you're doing office rent and maybe you're going to record that to your rent company and pay them out of the source company, but you have multiple companies that you're distributing the rent expense to. Well, that would be a perfect example of using a recurring batch with intercompany. And that we have an audit trail available, and you can display through the navigate both the source and the target GL resulting GL transaction when you're reviewing an intercompany posted transaction. It works with copy document, and so it allows you to repeat those telco invoices. So if in my example of the telco, if I had recorded a purchase invoice to my mobile telephone provider and I wish to recall and repost that same invoice maybe with some changes in amounts, I can do that through the copy document with my purchase invoice that was posted from the last period and pull over and have those lines recoded ready for my intercompany transaction the following month. Test reports display target dimensions and intercompany validation errors, so you can use the test report to review and determine if you've coded the correct intercompany and or the dimensions assigned or required. And you can optionally handle multi-currency conversion and posting of taxes. Now, there's an asterisk on this. It requires a bit more of a complex setup. We have some documentation on how our recommended setup for multi-currency handles that, but just on a high-level basis is that you create a unique currency code where it's identifying currency such as CAD to USD, and then you pick that code when you're doing those specific intercompany transactions with a foreign currency, and then it'll do the self-balancing and post with the expected target currency and such. So again, it's going to be a little bit more than what we're going to talk about today, but we do have documents on how to set that up to process or allow that to process that way. So at this point, we're just going to walk into a demo first of the ODT InterCompany. So I'm just looking at the base role center I'm in as the accounting manager with our open door ODT IC or intercompany add-on enabled. And just to highlight first, I'll just show you the general setup that's enabled. So if I go to General Ledger Setup, I can see within the General Ledger Setup that I have turned on to allow or enable intercompany to be processed in the GLs. So this enables or allows for posting through general journals and recurring journal batches. I can alternatively turn on or off whether the IC or the intercompany user level validation is to be turned on or off for this particular area as well. And again, just to highlight, but it's the same setup options in purchase and payable setup here. So again, whether I'm allowing it to be on or off in purchase and then also in sales, and whether I'm going to use the intercompany user level validation. So it's the same setup in sales. So at this point, what I'm going to do is now just go into the actual setup table. So there's two. There's intercompanies and intercompany translations. So the first one I'm going to work on is intercompanies. So within the intercompanies, I add to this list and I map the related due to, due from accounts that I'm going to be posting to, and then I turn on or off the taxes and posting of multi-currency. So in this list, then I could just simply add my additional companies if I wanted to, as an example, be able to post intercompany to my Mexico company from, in this case, my Canada company. So as we're talking about this now, my source company is Canada for my following demo examples and the discussions. My target is my Cronus USA. So I'm expecting to post my expenses to my USA company, and issue my payables out of Canada, with the resulting due to, due from being due to Canada in the US and due from US in Canada. Within my balance account, I can also alternatively separate my AP and my AR transactions to be a different due to, due from account if I wish. So when I drill down on this particular account to assign or select the due to, due from account for my target USA company, you'll notice that we see this intercompany column just ahead of these GL accounts. That indicates that I'm now browsing down real time to the Cronus USA GL accounts. So in this case then I've coded it to my due to, due from Canada account in my USA company. So that's going to be where the target intercompany account side of the entry will be posted to. So that's really it for the setup. And then now that I've turned on those particular companies, I need to assign the translations. So what I'm going to do is go to Intercompany, Translations, and within the Intercompany Translations, I can select again the company that I'm going to control or restrict my GL account ranges to and from. So I do have to fill in a from and I do have to fill in a to, but there then typically you're recording the expense account or revenue account A to B. And then this is where, as an alternative or an option, I can add a user account. So perhaps Sally in payables is allowed to use these expense accounts in USA. Well, then I could put Sally to Sally, and then I could add Joe and make him responsible for AR transactions as an example. Then I could have user from and to being Joe, and then it would not allow either or to post outside of their allowed ranges. Within the posting account, I now choose what the intercompany account is in this company. So in this case, I'm to use my due to, due from USA in my Canada company. I then add in the dimension translation. So I have two types here, but I have target posting and source. So I'm just going to cover target first. So what target allows me to do is define a range of allowed, in this case, projects for my USA that I'm allowed to code to these expense accounts. So again, this is just restricting what dimensions I'm allowed to post to in this particular target company. I can also then select what my source posting will be. So in this Canada company in this example, and here I'm just saying I'm going to post everything to the department ADM. Maybe I would want a dimension for intercompany as an example to highlight a different department or a different reason for this transaction, but I'm just using department in this example. Really, that's all the setup there is and required to be able to process or use our ODT intercompany. Now I've gone in and marked it to be allowed for purchase, sales, and GL in my target company, being the USA company. So now let's just try a sample transaction and go and review and see how that works. So for coding a document, all I would do is perhaps I want to just do a purchase invoice. So in this case, I'm going to go to my purchase invoice, and I'm going to select to do a new purchase invoice. And I always pick on vendor 10,000 being my London postmaster. So I'm just going to continue to use that vendor. There's no particular control or restriction on which vendors it's used for or anything like that. I'm just picking on 10,000. And my invoice number I'm going to populate now so I can go ahead and post. But of course it just depends on your process, what fields you use, whether you use responsibility centers or not, and things like that. So in this case, I'm just going to plunk in something to code. So I'm going to go 2016 0622 1045 as my invoice number, so I don't cause an issue with duplication. And now I'm just going to go to my line level. So my line level, I choose GL account. Remember, I can't use item with intercompany, so I'm going to choose GL account. I select which company I'm allowed to code this line to. This is where I could have additional companies such as USA and maybe in the second line, Mexico. In this example, I'm just going to use my look up here, and I can see the USA chart. Perhaps I want to look up 611 and hit tab, and then I can see I'm coding to USA advertising account. So I'm going to pick up that, and I'm just going to maybe say new billboard ad. Okay, and now I can just simply code my lines. So if I want to pick up my project code, I can then look up, and now I'm looking at project codes in my USA company. Then I'll perhaps choose my VW one, and then I'll pop in my amount. Perhaps I'll just expand the window to give us a bit more real estate to see what we're looking at, and I'll just make that $1,000. And that's all there is to it. So for any of us accounting buffs out there now, when I process this purchase invoice, I should wind up with a credit that I'm going to pay to my London postmaster with a debit to my intercompany receivables account, because the expense, or the debit here, should actually land in the target company, being USA. So at this point, I'm just going to now post my transaction. All right, my invoice is gone. Just to show you the auto post, so what I would do if I wanted to, and in this case I don't, just for the ability to review and show you what is occurring in the target company. So I'm just going to go to my users, but I can see here that I could, oh, my apologies, user setup. This is what I want to use. So I'm going to go to user setup. I could add myself and turn myself on for auto post. That way, as long as I open the company at month end, so I'm going to go into my US, it would automatically just show you a little screen, and you would see a green progress bar, and what it would be doing is posting, as I open the company, a unique general journal batch that's being created for processing. So in this case, I'm going to go to general journal, and within my general journal list, I would now see a new intercomp or intercompany batch that's being automatically generated and processed in behind. This batch always just sits there. It's just that that's where the resulting intercompany transactions will be processed. If I come in here, I can see that I have a line originating from Canada, ready to post here, and it highlights the invoice and that it was for the billboard ad. And again, I'm posting to my account 61100 being my target company, and then the offset, of course, is the due from in this target company that I'm now in. So all I'll do is I'll just simply process those. So I'll post this batch. And I'm now going to go back to my target company. Now that I've posted the other side of, oh, my apologies, I closed the intercompany. I'm just going to open that up again. I'll just expand that window again. It happens to all of us. Now that I'm going to go back to my source company, being Canada, just to show you the audit trail results. So now within this particular company, I could, let's say, review my GL register. So I'm just going to view the posted register. I'll look for my last register posting, just being, in this case, this 129, and I'm going to view my general ledger. So I am now currently looking at the general ledger entry in my source company, and you can see that's where I have my credit to my payable that I have to still pay my vendor, but there's my debit that I'm expecting a receivable back from my target company. But now if I do navigate, because I've posted the other side of the transaction, I actually get to see two GL entry lines here. One being, of course, the one that I'm looking at now, being the source company, and then I can also see the targets GL to be able to explore and see what happened in my USA company. So that's an overview of our ODT intercompany. What I can do as well is just show you the general journal. So if I go into a general journal as an example, I'll go into my default batch. But here's where I can simply create a general journal entry and then add a to company. So if I pick my USA, then when I'm looking in my general or my GL account, perhaps I want to use my 61, and I'm going to pick up my perhaps delivery expenses. Well, if I try to use my delivery expenses, I get an error because it's not within my allowed range that I've enabled for that particular user if I was using user validation. But in this case, it's just telling me, hey, that's outside of the range that's expected. Right, I need to pick perhaps entertainment and PR is what I actually needed to code to, and then I could put that in for meals expense. And then I could, code the other side to whatever GL account I want in the source company. I can either do it as a self-balance line, or I can then choose to do it as a separate line if I want the other side as a two-line journal entry. So it's just that I would leave the intercompany empty, and then that GL account now is my target being in this company. And then again, when you post that transaction, then you wind up with your intercompany transaction. And you can do your test report as well. I think that's something that I had missed showing in the purchase document posting. But within these test reports, then we can see what company and what GL account we're coding to. So in this case, of course, I haven't entered an amount, but it tells me my intercompany, and if I had selected intercompany dimensions, I would see those listed in this preview report here as well, so I can take that and have that on record.